The 60th anniversary of the infamous Centralia coal mine fire upon us now, it is an excellent time to talk about the darkest side of Pennsylvania's most prominent industry, the fires deep below ground. This state is the location of a third of all the United States' mining disasters and up to 45 confirmed fire zones, burning for decades or even centuries to come. But how did this happen, and why in the Keystone State? Well, today we will have a look into the history of Pennsylvania's coal mine disasters and fires, which have resulted in countless ghost towns. I'm your host Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Before the War of 1812 against Great Britain, anthracite or rock coal found infrequent use, as people had a tendency to stick with wood and charcoal. Anthracite was challenging to collect as its source was deep in the ground, and it was equally challenging to transport. However, as the 1800s progressed, transportation became increasingly more feasible as technology such as railroads and canals developed. In the 1860s, Pennsylvania's coal was one of the driving forces behind the Industrial Revolution of America. It regularly and almost single-handedly supplied metropolitan areas like New York City and Philadelphia with all the energy they needed. But when it came to iron and steel production, anthracite coal had no equal. Its fires produced much higher quality iron and yielded up to 25% more than its competitors. This efficiency quickly became highly sought after, and by the 1850s, hard coal produced more than half of all crude iron in the United States. This increased efficiency was instrumental in making the machinery needed to create structures such as steam engines, forming the backbone of the new industrial society. Railroad companies capitalized on the importance of Pennsylvania's coal, being chiefly responsible for its transportation from the mines, and these railroad companies became empires within the Industrial Revolution. This enormous concentration fueled the mining boom as the demand made it much easier to build deeper shafts and find more coal. In the 1850s, miners went as deep as 1,500 feet, working in small tunnels supported only by timber bars. Mines needed drainage systems to pump out water found deep underground, which was a frequent discovery. Mines also needed reliable ventilation systems to pump out used air and then pump back in fresh air. Without these air pumps, miners would suffocate on the very air that they breathed. One such incident was the Avondale mine disaster. On September the 6th, 1869, the wooden lining of the shaft caught fire and ignited the coal breaker built directly overhead. The fire trapped and suffocated 108 workers, as well as 2 rescuers trying to help them. It was the most significant mine disaster in American history at the time. Though accidents were common, parents all across the state delved into the depths, never to see the light of day again. Many felt they had no other choice in order to provide for their families. In 1917, production reached an astonishing 100 million tons, but nothing was ever enough for the ever-hungry furnaces of the Industrial Revolution, at least not until the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, industries switched to cheaper fuel alternatives like electricity, oil, and natural gas, which were more affordable, leading to existing mines being poorly maintained, which is bad news for many reasons, but fire would come to damage this state the most. You see, after the 1950s, coal mining became nearly irrelevant, and the number of abandoned mines was a major fire hazard. But before we examine their stories, let's have a quick overview on how coal mine fires start. A coal seam fire is when a coal source underground catches fire. An event like that might occur naturally, and they might have naturally occurred for millions of years, even without human intervention. But importantly, they were previously primarily on the surface, where coal could easily reach oxygen in the atmosphere. Even a wildfire might ignite coal near the surface and start the fire, which is likely the case with the oldest known coal seam fire. That fire is a burning mountain in Australia whose flames have already raged for 6,000 years. But that being said, the fires we're discussing today are totally different. These fires happened deep underground, where natural circumstances don't allow for fire. You might wonder, why? Well, fire needs 3 things to ignite: heat, oxygen, and fuel. Surface level coal seam fires have everything figured out. The coal is the fuel, the oxygen is the air, and the heat enters from the wilderness or other circumstances. So how does it happen underground? Well, coal deposits are often near pockets of highly flammable methane gas, and as you might imagine, if even the smallest spark occurs, the gas pocket can burst into flames if oxygen is present. And although you might not realize it, sparks actually happen all the time. For example, one could come from, let's say, a miner's pickaxe striking a stone. That spark-causing miner also needs his oxygen to breathe, so if the mine is pumped full of fresh oxygen, then the methane gas has all the tools needed to explode into flames. And depending on the size of the gas pocket, the resulting explosion could be insignificantly small or so massive that it might be mistaken as an earthquake. So it's no wonder that methane blasts were often the most common cause of death within mines. And as if that wasn't enough, should the explosion be large, coal may reach its combustion temperature. In this case, the methane explosion provides the heat, the oxygen is already present, and the coal becomes the fuel. And if you ever used coal for a grill, you'll know how long it can burn and just how hot it can get, even after the fire seems to have run out. So in the context of a massive coal mine, imagine the same thing with literal tons of coal supported by industrial air pumps. Fire like that is nearly impossible to extinguish. In smaller mines, one can stop the growth by demolishing mine shafts, but given the coal-rich mines of Pennsylvania, where one can find plenty of coal, when a fire starts, it does not stop. It might burn for decades or even centuries. And although many precautions are taken, sometimes a mine fire is just as simple as the wrong place at the wrong time, as was the case with Pennsylvania's most famous coal mine fire, resulting in a massive ghost town, Centralia. Let's head back to 1962 Centralia, and the story starts in an attempt to dispose of trash. Local authorities set fire to a landfill, but with the dump, something else began to burn, a nearby mine, which sat abandoned. Let's run down that list again. Oxygen. It had ventilation from when it was in use, so check. Heat. The landfill is burning. Fire is enough heat to ignite the coal, so check. And fuel. An entire mine full of coal, so also check. All the pieces were together, leading to a fire consuming the town. Over the years, residents fled, sinkholes emerged, and the fire has burned for 60 years and counting. But it's not only Centralia that burns to this day. In December of 1915, a miner accidentally left his lamp lit on a timber support, eventually catching fire. Due to the company laying off their night watchman, this fire went unnoticed for an entire weekend. Upon returning on Monday, December the 6th, the fire had grown beyond manageable levels. The miners attempted to block off the air supply by blocking vents with sand and filling the entrance with concrete, after which they stated everything was under control. However, by 1921, it had become apparent that the fire had only grown. The company began building temporary seals to contain the fire so that the area could remain workable, which is a rather frightening thought. This situation persisted until Colliery ceased active mining in 1957, at which point they also stopped trying to control the fire. As a result, by 1962, residents in the nearby town of Laurel Run had to abandon their homes due to the gases that were seeping out of the mine. And by 1971, when more blockage actions began, 850 residents had to relocate elsewhere. In Pennsylvania, these types of stories are not unique. In the mid-1940s, a fire in Carbondale, Pennsylvania city dump, the source of which is unknown, spread to a nearby mine. Attempts to flood the mine failed throughout the late 40s and early 50s, at which point the town dug boreholes around the perimeter to choke it out with sand. They then attempted to dig out the fire, but significant property damage and fire spread forced this process to stop. 1952 saw the first fatalities as a couple suffocated to death on carbon monoxide in their own home. dozens later suffered poisoning, but no deaths. Before anyone else could die, evacuation began in 1960 as the fire spread throughout the decades. By 1974, however, the city had successfully extinguished it after 1,000 residents had already evacuated, and it caused millions of dollars of damage. Pennsylvania has over 250,000 acres of abandoned post-mine fire lands. Estimates claim that 1.3 thousand acres of underground mines still burn to this day, and that the remaining abandoned mine shafts in the state do not bode well either. All it takes is one erratic spark, and the state may suffer yet another fire and end up with another ghost town. One more disturbing thought is that some estimations suggest that these types of mine fires contribute more to global warming than cars. These fires are extremely difficult to put down, and in some cases, extinguishment is simply impossible. One can only hope that in another 60 years, these fires will have gone the way of their industry, but that might very well be wishful thinking. In places such as Centralia, they're expected to burn for 1,000 years.